The Crogan's Christmas in the Snowshed by Jacob A. Riis. Read for you by Elaine Frank. A storm was brewing in the mountains. The white glare of the earlier day had been supplanted by a dull gray, and the peaks that shut the winter landscape in were smoking, a sure harbinger of the blizzard already raging in the high Sierras. The pines above the Crogan's cabin stood like spectral sentinels in the failing light, their drooping branches heavy with the snow of many storms. Mrs. Tom Crogan sat at the window looking listlessly into the darkening day. In the spring she had come with her husband from the little Minnesota town that was their home, full of hope and the joy of life. The mountains were beautiful then, with wild flowers and the sweet smell of fragrant firs, and as she rocked her baby to sleep, in their deep shadows she sang to him the songs her mother had crooned over her cradle in her tuneful Swedish tongue. Life then had seemed very fair, and the Snowshed hardly a shadow across it. For in her life there were two sides, one that looked out upon the mountains and the trees and the wild things that stirred in God's beautiful world. The other, the blind side that turned toward the darkness man had made in his fight to conquer that world. Tom Crogan was a dispatcher at a signal station in the great snowsheds that stretched 40 miles or more up the slopes of the Sierras, plunging the road to the land of sunshine into hour-long gloom just when the jagged saw-tooth peaks that give the range its name came into sight. Travelers knew them to their grief, a huge crawling thing of timber and stout planks, so it seemed as one caught fleeting glimpses of it in the brief escapes from its murky embrace, that followed the mountain up, hugging its side close as it rose farther and farther toward the summit. Hideous always, in winter buried often out of sight by the smashing avalanches old Boreas hurled at the pygmy folk who dared challenge him in his own realm. But within the shelter of the snowsheds they laughed at his bluster, secure from harm, for then it served its appointed purpose. The Crogan's house fronted, or backed, whichever way one chose to look at it, upon the shed. Tom's office, where the telegraph ticker was always talking of men and things in the desert sands to the east, or in the orange groves over the divide, never saw the sunshine it told of. It burrowed in perpetual gloom. 9 times a day, trains full of travelers who peered curiously at the signalmen with their lanterns, and at Tom as so many human moles burrowing in the mountain, came and went, and took the world of men with them, yawning as they departed at the prospect of more miles of night. At odd intervals, long freight trains lingered, awaiting orders, and lent a more human touch. For the engineer had time to swap yarns with Tom, and the brakeman looked in to chuck the baby under the chin and to predict, when their smudge faces frightened him, that he would grow up to be as fine a railroader as his father. His yell was as good as a whistle to down brakes. Even a wandering hobo once in a while showed his face from behind the truck on which he was stealing a ride cross-country, and grimaced at Mrs. Tom, safe in the belief that she would not give him away. And she didn't. But now the winter had come with the heavy snows that seemed never to end. She could not venture out upon the mountain where the pines stood buried many feet deep. In truth, there was no getting out. Her life was banked up, as it were, to stay so till spring came again. As she sat watching the great white waste that sloped upward toward the lowering sky, she counted the months. 2, 3, 4, 5 probably, or 6 to wait, for this was Christmas and the winter was but fairly underway. 5 months! The winters were hard enough on the plains, but the loneliness of these mountains! What glad visiting and holiday-making were going on now in her old home among kindred and friends. There it was truly a season of kindliness and good cheer. They had brought their old Norse Yule with them across the seas. She choked back a sob as she stirred the cradle with her foot. For Tom's sake she would be brave, but no letter nor word had come from the East, and this was their first Christmas away from home. There was a man's step on the stairs from the office, and Tom Crogan put his head through the doorway. "Got a bite for a hungry man?" he asked, blinking a bit at the white light from without. The baby woke up and gurgled. Tom waved the towel at him, drying his face at the sink, and hugged his wife as she passed. "Storm coming," he said, glancing out at the weather and listening to the soughing of the wind in the pines. "Nothing else here," she replied, setting the table. "Nothing this long while. And oh, Tom!" She set down the plate, went over to him. "No word from home, and this is Christmas Eve. Nothing even for the baby." He patted her back affectionately and cheered her after the manner of a man. "Train's all late. The snow is that deep. More particular in the east, they say. Mail might not come through for a week. Baby don't know the difference so long as he is warm. And coal we've got a-plenty. Then it will be New Year's." She pursued her own thoughts drearily. Tom was not a good comforter just then. He ate like a tired man, in silence. "Special on the line," he said, as he stirred the sugar in his coffee. "When the road opens up, she'll follow right on the overland. Some of your rich folks, most like, going for a holiday on the coast," she commented without interest. Tom nodded. She gave the stove lid an impatient twist. "Little they know," she said bitterly, "or care either, how we live up here in the sheds. They'd oughter take their turn at it for a while. There's the Wrights with Jim laid up since he broke his leg at the time of the wreck, and can't seem to get no strength. And the Colsons with their old mother in this griping cold, and all the sicknesses they had, and he laid off, though he wasn't to blame, and you know it, Tom. If it hadn't been for you, what would have come of the overland running straight for that wrecked train with full head of steam?" Tom looked up good-humoredly and pushed back his plate. "Why, Mary, what's come over you?" "I only done what I was there to do, and they took notice all right. Don't you remember the company wrote and thanked me for being spry?" "Thanked you? What good is that? Here we be, and like to stay till— you can come up if you want to." The invitation was extended, ungraciously enough, to a knot of men clustered about the steps. They trooped in, a gang of snow shovelers fresh from their fight with the big drifts, and stood about the stove, the cold breath of outdoors in their looks and voices. Their talk was of their work just finished. The road was clear, but for how long? And they flapped their frozen mittens toward the window through which the snow could be seen already beginning to fall in large, ominous flakes. The special was discussed with eager interest. No one knew who it was, an unusual thing. Generally, words came along the line giving the news, but there had been no warning of this one. "Maybe it's the president inspectin'," ventured one of the crew. "I tank it bane some of dem Wall Street fellers on one big bust," threw in a husky Swede. In the laugh that followed this sally, the ticker was heard faintly clicking out a message in the office below. Tom listened. "Overland, 3 hours late," he said, and added with a glance outside as he made ready to go, "Like as not, they'll be later than that. They won't keep Christmas on the coast this while." The snow shovelers trailed out after Tom with many a foghorn salute of Merry Christmas to his wife and to the baby. The words, well meant, jarred harshly upon Mrs. Crogan. Merry Christmas! It sounded in her ear almost like a taunt. When they were gone, she stood at the window, struggling with a sense of such bitter desolation that she had never known till then. The snow fell thick now and whirled across the hillside in fitful gusts. In the gathering darkness, trees and rocks were losing shape and color. Nothing was left but the white cold, the thought of which chilled her to the marrow. Through the blast, the howl of a lone wolf came over the ridge, and she remembered the story of Donner Lake, just beyond, and the party of immigrants who starved to death in the 40s, shut in by such a winter as this. There were ugly tales on the mountains of things done there, which men told under their breath when the great storms thundered through the canyons and all were safe within. She had heard the crew of the Rotary say that there was as much as 10 feet of snow on some of the levels already, and the winter only well begun. Without knowing it, she fell to counting the months to spring again. 2, 3, 4, 5. With a convulsive shudder, she caught up the child and fled to the darkest corner of the room. Crouching there by the fire, her grief and bitterness found vent in a flood of rebellious tears. Down in his dark coop, Tom Crogan, listening to a distant roar and the quickening rhythm of the rails, knew that the overland was coming. Presently it shot out from behind the shoulder of the mountain. Ordinarily it passed swiftly enough, but today it slowed up and came to a stop at the station. The conductor hurried into the office and held an anxious consultation with Tom, who shook his head decisively. If the storm kept up, there would be no getting out that night. The cut over at the lake that had just been cleared was filling up again, and the wind blowing from the north. There was nothing to do but wait, anyhow, until they knew for certain. The conductor agreed with bad grace, and the Rotary was started up the road to reconnoiter. The train discharged its weary and worried passengers, who walked up and down the dark cavern to stretch their legs, glancing indifferently at the little office where the telegraph kept up its intermittent chatter. Suddenly it clicked out a loud warning. "Special on way. Clear the track." Tom rapped on his window and gave quick orders. The men hurried to carry them out. "Not far she'll go," they grinned as they set the switch and made all safe. At the turn, half a mile below, the red eye of the locomotive gleamed already in the dusk. In a few minutes it pulled in with a shriek of its whistle that woke the echoes of the hills far and near, and stood panting in a cloud of steam. Trackmen and signalmen craned their necks to see the mysterious stranger. Even Mrs. Tom had dried her tears and came out to look at the despised bigwigs from the east, rebellion yet in her homesick heart. The news that the big boss might be on board had spread to the passenger train, and crowds flocked from the sleepers, curious to get a glimpse of the railroad magnate who had made such a stir in the land. His power was so great that common talk credited him with being stronger than Congress and the courts combined. The newspapers recorded all his doings as it did the president's, but with this difference, that while everybody knew all about the man in the White House, few, if any, seemed to know anything real about the railroad man's private life. In the popular estimation, he was a veritable sphinx. At his country home in the East, he had bought up the land for 5 miles around, even the highways, to keep intruders out. Here now was an unexpected chance, and the travelers crowded up to get a look at him. But they saw no luxurious private car with frock-coated officials and liveried servants. An everyday engine with 3 express cars in tow stood upon the track, and baggagemen in blue overalls yelled for hand trucks and hustled out boxes and crates consigned to the agent at Shawnee. Yet it was not an everyday train, nor an ordinary crew, for all of them, conductor, brakeman, engineer, and fireman, wore holly in their caps and broad grins on their faces. The locomotive flew 2 white flags with the words "Merry Christmas" in red letters across the cars in a strip of canvas that was strung their whole length, with the legend "The Christmas Train" in capitals a foot high. Even in the gloom of the Snowshed it shone out, plain to read. Tom in his office rubbed his eyes for another and better look when the conductor of the special, pushing his way through the wondering crowds, flung open the door. "Here's your documents," he said, slapping down a paper, "and the orders are that you're to see they gets 'em." Tom Crogan took up the paper as if dazed, and looked at the entries without in the least understanding what it all meant. He did not see the jam of railroad men and passengers who had crowded into the office on the heels of the conductor until they filled it to the doors. Neither did he notice that his wife had come with them and was standing beside him, looking as mystified as he. Mechanically he read out the items in the way-bill, while the conductor checked them off with many a wink at the crowd. What nightmare was this? Had some delirious Santa Claus invaded the office of the Union Pacific Railroad, turned it into a toy shop and dry goods bazaar combined, with a shake of his reindeer bells? Or was it a huge, wretched, misbegotten joke? Surely a stranger bill of lading never went over the line, or over any railroad line before. This was what he read. Crate of fat turkeys, 1 for every family on the station. Their names followed. 1 ditto of red apples. 1 ditto of oranges, to be similarly apportioned. For Tom Crogan, 1 meerschaum pipe. For James Wright, lately injured in the service and not yet recovered, a box of books, and allowance of full pay during disability, ordered to report at Sacramento until fully restored. For John Colson, Christmas gifts, including a warm flannel wrapper for his old mother, also notice of back pay allowed since suspension, with full restoration to place and pay. For Mrs. Thomas Crogan, not on the official payroll, but whom the company takes this opportunity to thank for assistance rendered her husband on a recent occasion, 1 dress pattern with the wishes of the superintendent's office for a very Merry Christmas. For Master Thomas Crogan, not yet on the official payroll, being under age, a box of toys, including rubber ball and sheep, doll and Noah's Ark, with the compliments of the company for having chosen so able a railroad man for his father. For Master Thomas Crogan, as a token of regard from passengers on the Overland of November 18th, 1 rocking horse, crated. "Oh, Tom!" Mrs. Crogan caught her breath with a gasp. "And he not a year old!" Tom looked up to find the room full of people laughing at him and at her, but there was hearty, happy goodwill in the laugh, and Mrs. Tom was laughing back. The conductor got up to go, but checked himself abruptly. "If I didn't come near to forget," he said, and reached for his pocket. "Here, Tom, this is for you from the superintendent. If it ain't a secret, read it aloud." The message was brief. Thomas Crogan, Esquire, agent and dispatcher at Shawnee Station. The compliments of the season and of the superintendent's office to you. Have a Merry Christmas, Tom, up in your shed, for we want you down on the coast after New Year's. Frank Alden, Superintendent. Tom looked up with a smile. He had got his bearings at last. There was no doubt about that signature. His eyes met his wife's, brimming with sudden joy. The dream of her life was made real. The railroad men raised a cheer in which there was a note of regret, for Tom was a prime favorite with them all, and crowded up to shake hands. The passengers followed suit, ready to join in, yet mystified still. But now, when they heard from the conductor of the special how Tom by quick action had saved the Overland, the very train they were on, from running into a wrecked freight 2 months before, many of them remembered the story of it, how Tom, being left alone when everybody else lost his head in the smash-up, had sprinted down the track with torpedoes, while his wife set the switch and waved the signal lantern and had just caught the limited around the curve, and how narrow had been the escape from a great disaster. And their quick sympathy went out to the young couple up in the lonely heights, who a few moments before had been less to them than the inert thing of iron and steel that was panting on the track outside like a huge monster after a hard run. When it was learned that both trains were stalled, perhaps for all night, the recollection that it was Christmas Eve gave sudden direction to their sympathies. Since friends on the coast must wait, they would have their Christmas where they were, if it were in the Snowshed. In less time than anyone could have made a formal motion, the train full of excited passengers, just now so disgruntled, resolved itself into a committee of arrangements to which were added both the train crews. A young balsam from the mountainside made its appearance. No one knew exactly how, and in a trice it shone with a wealth of candles and toys, at which the baby, struggling up to a sitting posture in his cradle, looked with wide-eyed wonder. The Crogans' modest living-room was made festive with holly and evergreen, and transformed into a joyous dining-room before Mrs. Tom could edge in a word of protest. All the memories of her cherished Yule surged in upon her as the room filled with the smell of roast turkey and mince pie and what not of good cheer, borne by a procession of white-clad waiters who formed a living chain between the dining-car and the station. When in the wake of them the veritable rocking-horse, hastily unpacked, was led in by a hysterical workman and pranced and pawed its way across the floor, its reins jingling with silver bells, Thomas Crogan, Jr., considered it, sitting bolt upright, one long minute, sighed, and, overwhelmed by such magnificence, went calmly to sleep. It was too much for one Christmas Eve, and he not a year old. When as many as could crowd in were seated with Tom Crogan and his wife, the conductors and engineers of the 2 trains representing the road, the clergyman in the party arose to remind them all that they were far from home and friends, keeping Christmas in the mountain wilderness. "But," he said, "though a continent separates us, we meet with them all here tonight before the face of Him who came as a helpless babe to the world of sin and selfishness and brought peace and goodwill to men." And he read to them how it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed, and the story of the child that is old, yet will ever be new while the world stands. In the reverent hush that had fallen upon the company, a tenor voice rose clear and sweet in the old hymn. It came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old. When the lines were reached, still through the cloven skies they come, with peaceful wings unfurled. Many of the passengers joined in and sang the verse to the end. The familiar words seemed to come with a comforting message to everyone in the little cabin. In the excitement, they had all forgotten the weather. Unseen by everyone, the moon had come out and shone clear in an almost cloudless sky. The storm was over. A joyful toot of the rotary's whistle, as dinner neared its end, announced its return with the welcome news that the road was open once more. With many hearty handshakes, wishes for happy years to come, the unexpected Christmas party broke up. But there was yet a small ceremony left. It was performed by a committee of 3 of the overland passengers who had friends or kin on board the train Tom Crogan had saved. They had quietly circulated among the rest, and now, with the conductor shouting, "All aboard!" they put an envelope into Tom's hand, with the brief directions for moving expenses, and jumped on their car as the engine blew its last warning whistle and the air brakes wheezed their farewell. Tom opened it and saw 5 crisp $20 bills tucked neatly inside. The Limited pulled out on the stroke of midnight, with cheering passengers on every step and in every window. Tom and his wife stood upon the step of the little station and waved their handkerchiefs as long as the bull's-eye on the last car was in sight. When it was gone, and they were left with the Snowshed and the Special breathing sleepily on its siding, she laid her head on his shoulder. A rush of repentant tears welled up and mingled with the happiness in her voice. "Oh, Tom," she said, "did ye ever know the like of it? I am fair sorry to leave the old shed."